The day my daughter-in-law claimed my house, the morning light was too gentle for what was coming. It filtered through lace curtains, touching the photographs on the mantel. Harold in his Navy uniform, our son Michael at 10, grinning with missing teeth. I was setting out teacups when the front door opened without a knock. Brianna swept in like she already owned the air, heels clicking against the oak floor I'd polished for 32 years. "Evelyn," she said, voice sugar-sweet and steady, "you should start packing. This house is mine now." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. The words were so casual, so certain, that my heart didn't know whether to laugh or break. She waved a folder. "Contracts," she said, "deeds and signatures Michael had meant to file." But when I looked closer, the ink still smelled fresh. Behind her confidence was something trembling, a lie rehearsed too long. And while she stood there boasting about marble countertops and property lines, I felt something I hadn't in months since losing my son. Clarity. If this house was truly hers, she wouldn't fear the truth written in my husband's hand. So I smiled, reached for the key drawer, and said quietly, "Let's read the will." The claim. The kettle whistled softly that morning, a gentle, harmless sound so ordinary it almost mocked me later for not hearing what it was warning me about. I turned off the stove, poured 2 cups, and placed them on the table, one for myself, one for the memory of the man whose chair still sat across from me. The scent of chamomile drifted through the kitchen, threading through the quiet hum of a house that had been my anchor for 3 decades. When you've lived in one place long enough, every creak learns your name. The floors under the hallway window always sighed when it rained. The cabinet beside the sink groaned like an old friend. And the front door, it didn't open, it announced. A deep wooden moan, followed by a gust of air that carried the scent of whoever entered. That morning, it carried Brianna's perfume, sharp, expensive, and entirely out of place. "Morning," she said, stepping in without waiting for me to answer. She was dressed like she was walking into a courtroom instead of her late husband's mother's house, pencil skirt, tailored blazer, heels that tapped judgment into the floorboards. In one hand, a sleek leather folder. In the other, her phone. "Brianna," I said slowly, forcing calm into my tone. "You could have called first." She smiled. That particular kind of smile that isn't kindness, it's strategy. "Oh, I didn't want to bother you, Evelyn. I just needed to stop by and talk about the house." The way she said the house, not your house, not even our house, told me everything. I motioned for her to sit, but she stayed standing, her shadow cutting across Harold's old armchair. "Michael always said this place was a little big for one person," she continued. "He wanted it to stay in the family, of course, for when we, you know." Her hand brushed across her stomach meaningfully, though her blouse was flat as ever. I looked up sharply. "Are you saying you're pregnant?" Her eyes flickered just a beat too long. "We were trying," she said finally, as if the words themselves were calculated currency. "Anyway, it's what he wanted. I think he'd be happy to know I'm taking responsibility now." "Responsibility?" I repeated. "For what?" "For the property," she said lightly, tapping the folder against her palm. "I've been speaking with an agent. The market's strong right now, and frankly, this house could sell for a small fortune. It's too much for you to maintain, don't you think?" My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sharp, hot insult of it. "This house," I said evenly, "isn't for sale." She tilted her head. "It's not your decision. Any more, Evelyn. The will says otherwise." There it was, the first strike. She dropped the folder on the table, paper fanning out like white feathers. "Michael wanted me to have the house," she said. "He told me himself. And he signed the documents before the accident." I reached for the papers, scanning the first page. It looked official enough, typed, notarized, Michael's name at the bottom. But something in the signature was wrong. The way the M slanted, the uneven pressure of the ink. "Where did you get this?" I asked quietly. "From our lawyer," she said too quickly. "He handled Michael's affairs after the funeral." I lifted my eyes to hers. "I handled Michael's affairs after the funeral." For the first time, her confidence wavered. Just a flicker, a ripple across calm water. "Well," she said, regrouping, "maybe it's something Harold prepared before he passed. There might have been updates." I pushed the papers back toward her. I was Harold's executor. I know what's on file. Her jaw tightened. You're being difficult. This is what Michael wanted. I know it. Then you won't mind, I said softly, if we read the will. She blinked. What? The original will, I said, standing slowly. The one Harold signed, the one Michael inherited. I think it's time we read it together. Her lips parted, but no words came. A bead of sweat formed at her temple despite the cool air. Evelyn, she said after a moment, her tone shifting to something sugar-coated and dangerous. I don't want this to be ugly. You're grieving. I understand that. But you can't live in the past forever. This house is a burden emotionally, financially, physically. I'm just trying to honor Michael's wishes. I looked around the room, at the framed photographs lining the mantel. Harold and me on our wedding day. Michael in his graduation gown. The three of us laughing in front of Takias. This very house. The magnolia tree blooming in the background. Do you see that tree? I asked. She frowned, caught off guard. What? The magnolia. Harold planted it the year Michael was born. Said every house needs something that outlives it. I met her gaze squarely. This place isn't just walls and square footage, Brianna. It's memory. And I won't let you sell memory like it's a used car. Her smile vanished. Then I'll do it without your blessing. She gathered the papers, stuffed them into her folder, and turned toward the door. You'll hear from my attorney, she said over her shoulder. And Evelyn, don't make this harder than it has to be. The door closed behind her, leaving a silence so sharp it hummed. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind brush the magnolia leaves outside, and for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. Brianna thought she knew what Michael had left behind. She thought she could rewrite the past with fresh ink and arrogance. But she had forgotten one thing. Harold had always planned for storms. And somewhere, in this house or beyond it, I knew he'd left something waiting, something Brianna wasn't expecting. A truth written in his hand. And by the time I found it, that truth would change everything she thought she owned. The paper and the signature. After Brianna stormed out that morning, I didn't sit down for hours. Her perfume still lingered in the air, clinging to the lace curtains as if even the room couldn't breathe. I tried to drink my tea, but it had gone cold, the surface trembling slightly in the cup. I spent the rest of the day pacing between the kitchen and Harold's old study, feeling the ache of his absence more than ever. When Harold was alive, he'd been meticulous about paperwork, neat rows of labeled folders, everything in order. I could almost hear his voice teasing, Evie, always keep one copy. It locked away. Ink fades, but truth doesn't. By nightfall, that line wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, I decided to follow it. The study smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I opened every drawer of the oak desk one by one until I found it, the tiny brass key Harold had tucked under the false bottom of the drawer. I remembered him slipping it there years ago, saying it was for a rainy day. Well, the storm had arrived. That key belonged to a safety deposit box at East Bridge Savings, the bank where Harold had worked half his life. I dressed neatly, pulled my gray shawl tight, and drove into town. The air was cool, the sky pale, the kind of morning that feels like a warning whispered too softly. The clerk at the bank took one look at the key and nodded. Box 1742, Mrs. Brooks. Would you like a private room? Yes, please. The vault's air was colder than outside, heavy with the smell of metal and old secrets. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The box clicked open with a sound that made my heart jump. Inside were 2 envelopes and a small black microcassette recorder. My fingers shook as I picked up the envelope marked Magnolia Trust, original copy. Harold's handwriting. I unfolded the papers carefully. The first page was the official trust declaration, the document Harold had set up 5 years before he passed. I remembered signing it, not really understanding the details back then, too busy crying to notice, but now every word glowed with meaning. This residence, located at 219 Willow Street, shall remain in the possession and lifetime use of my spouse, Evelyn Brooks. Upon her passing, the property shall transfer to my issue, if any, provided they exhibit conduct of filial duty and good faith. Filial duty and good faith. My breath caught. That clause meant that any heir who acted with deceit or coercion would lose their inheritance rights. Harold had known. Somehow, he'd known this day might come. Under the trust papers was a letter, folded neatly with my name on it. Evie, if you're reading this, someone has tried to take what's yours. Don't let them. This house is not just brick, it's the sum of our lives together. The trust protects it, and so does the addendum filed under seal. You can find details at the county probate office, and if anyone doubts you're right, let them listen to my voice on the tape. Always yours, Harold. I pressed the cassette into the recorder and hit play. The tape hissed softly before Harold's deep voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, Evie, it means a line's been crossed. This house is yours for as long as your heart beats under its roof. Anyone who says otherwise, no matter their blood, loses their claim under Section 7. I made sure of it. And if it's our son's wife, God help me, I hope not know that the law stands with you. His voice cracked faintly at the end, and I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from crying out loud. When the recording stopped, the silence was deafening. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the papers, the letter, the proof. It wasn't just sentiment, it was ironclad law. Brianna's document, whatever she had waved in my face, couldn't override this, but a part of me still needed to be sure. I drove straight from the bank to the county records office. Alma Cortez, the clerk who'd helped me settle Harold's estate years ago, still worked there. She looked up from her desk and smiled when she saw me. Evelyn Brooks, good heavens, it's been ages. What brings you here? Alma, I said quietly. I need to see any filings regarding my husband's trust or anything my daughter-in-law might have tried to record recently. She frowned and began typing. Let's see. Magnolia Trust. Established 2017. Last update. None. Nothing new since Harold's passing. No changes filed, no successor amendments, and no transfers. Are you certain? As certain as the paper in front of me, she said firmly. If someone tried to alter ownership without your consent, it's invalid. You're the lifetime beneficiary, Evelyn. Nobody can throw you out of that house. I let out a shaky breath. Alma, one more thing. Is there an addendum? Her eyes twinkled. Ah, Harold's infamous addendum. Yes, sealed in probate. You can request it as trustee, but only in person. I smiled for the first time in days. Then I'll do that tomorrow. By the time I returned home, the weight pressing on my chest had changed. It wasn't fear anymore, it was determination. The truth was mine now, sealed in ink and memory. But before I could even pour myself a cup of tea, the phone rang. It was Brianna. Her tone was sharp, the kind she used when she thought she was in control. Evelyn, I hope you've had time to think. My attorney is drafting a sale agreement. If you cooperate, I'll make sure you have a comfortable stipend. I almost laughed. A stipend? For my own house? Don't be difficult, she snapped. Michael would want peace, not stubbornness. It's just business. Brianna, I said evenly, I found Harold's trust papers today. You might want to stop your attorney before he embarrasses himself. There was silence on the line, then a cold little laugh. You think a dusty piece of paper can stop me? My lawyer says, your lawyer hasn't read Section 7, I interrupted softly. I suggest you come over tomorrow morning at 10. Bring him. We'll read it together. I don't have time for theatrics, she sneered. Neither do I said, but I believe Harold's words deserve to be heard. I hung up before she could reply. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed gently in the wind, scattering its pale petals across the porch. I stood there for a long moment, watching them fall, and realized that at the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Harold had built this house with his hands, but he'd built my courage with his love. And tomorrow, that courage would be my armor. Brianna thought she had the law on her side. She was about to find out the difference between a signature and the truth. The reading at the table. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. I woke before sunrise, nerves buzzing in my fingertips. The house was still the way only old homes can be when they're listening. I brewed a pot of tea, laid out the china cups Harold loved, and placed the documents neatly in the center of the dining table, the trust, the addendum, and the letter. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. By 9:30, the scent of magnolia drifted through the open window. I put on Harold's navy cardigan, the one that still carried a faint trace of his cologne, and waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, the sound of tires crunched on the gravel. Brianna arrived in a black blazer, heels sharp enough to cut glass, and a young man trailing behind her, a lawyer, barely 30, his briefcase still stiff from lack of use. She didn't bother to knock, just swept inside like she already owned the place. "Good morning," I said, gesturing to the table. "Would you like tea?" "No, thank you," she said curtly, her eyes darting to the papers. "Let's just get this over with. I've already spoken with my attorney about the sale. He'll explain the logistics." The young man cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Brooks, my client has reason to believe the property at 219 Willow was transferred to her late husband under his father's will. The probate record," I cut him off gently. "There is no such transfer. The property was held in a living trust, not under Harold's will. You'll find that in the documents you're about to read." He blinked. "A trust?" "Yes, the Magnolia Trust." I slid the first folder toward them. "Please, read for yourselves." Brianna snatched it up. "You can't expect me to believe some old paper still holds any legal weight." Michael said, "Michael," I said softly, "never read this document. He didn't need to." Her lips pressed into a hard line, but she opened the folder anyway. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the faint rustle of pages and the rhythmic tick of the mantel clock. Her lawyer leaned closer, brow furrowing as he skimmed Section 7. I saw his color change, a slight pallor creeping up his neck. Brianna looked up finally, her eyes narrow. "This says you have lifetime possession, but Michael was the successor trustee, wasn't he?" "That makes me nothing," I said quietly. "It makes you nothing until I die." Her mouth fell open slightly. "That's absurd." "It's the law," I replied. "Harold made sure of it." She slammed the folder shut, her face flushed. "You think you can just wave this around and stop me? I have witnesses, bank statements, proof that Michael managed this property after his father passed. He was maintaining it." "Yes," I said evenly, "as trustee, not as owner." Her lawyer hesitated, clearly torn between his client's fury and the ink in front of him. "Mrs. Brooks," he said carefully, "this clause here, no beneficiary who attempts to alienate the residence from Evelyn shall take under the trust that means, I interrupted. "If your client continues this nonsense, she forfeits everything." Brianna's jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." Without a word, I reached into my bag and set Harold's sealed letter in the center of the table. "My husband left this for moments exactly like this one," I said. "Would you like to hear his words?" Her lawyer looked uneasy. "Mrs. Brooks, I don't think," but Brianna leaned back, arms crossed. "Fine. Let's hear what the ghost has to say." I pressed play on the old recorder. Harold's voice filled the room, steady, calm, unmistakably alive despite the years. "If you're hearing this, it means someone is trying to take this house from Evelyn. Let me be clear. The Magnolia House belongs to her until she no longer wishes to live in it. Any heir who pressures her, deceives her, or uses her kindness for gain is immediately disinherited. This is not a threat. It's a promise." The words hung in the air like smoke. Brianna's lawyer swallowed hard. "Mrs. Vance, perhaps we should—" "Quiet," she hissed, her voice trembling. The tape clicked again, Harold's voice softening. "Evie, if she's there, and I hope to God she's not, remember that the law is written in your favor. Don't let grief make you small. This house is yours, and no one can take it without your consent." The recording ended with the faint scrape of his chair, then silence. For a moment, none of us moved. Even the clock seemed to pause. When I finally looked up, Brianna's face had lost its color completely. "You forged Michael's signature," I said quietly. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice the double tail on the M? He never wrote it that way." Her eyes darted toward her lawyer, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "Mrs. Brooks," he stammered, "perhaps we should adjourn." I leaned forward, my voice calm but cold. If you file one more false document or make another claim against this property, I will take every recording, every note, and every signature to the court. And when the judge hears Harold's voice, he'll disinherit you faster than you can say the word probate." Her lips trembled. "You can't prove I can," I said, cutting her off. "The notary who signed your paper, Delacroix, your cousin. Alma already told me she's under investigation for falsifying records." The young lawyer buried his face in his hands. "Brianna, is that true?" Her silence was answer enough. I gathered the papers slowly, stacking them with deliberate care. "This meeting is over," I said softly. "You're free to leave, but you'll do it without raising your voice in my home." She stood there, trembling, then turned and stormed toward the door. But before she crossed the threshold, she spun around. "You think you've won, old woman," she spat. "But you can't live forever." I met her gaze steadily. "Maybe not," I said, "but Harold's words will." The front door slammed behind her, and the house fell quiet again. I sank into the chair, feeling both drained and strangely lighter. The magnolia tree outside shivered in the wind, scattering white petals across the porch steps. A few minutes later, Alma called. "Did she show up?" "She did," I said, smiling faintly. "And she left with less than she came." Alma chuckled. "Harold always did think ahead. You're all right, Evelyn?" "I am now," I said, looking at the sunlight pooling across the table. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." When I hung up, I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The air was fresh, sweet, with magnolia bloom. I stepped onto the porch and whispered toward the branches. "You can rest easy now, Harold. The house is safe." The wind shifted, rustling the leaves gently, almost like an answer. But I knew better than to believe in ghosts. Some promises don't need to be spoken twice. They live on in the ink, in the walls, and in the quiet strength of those left behind. The hidden addendum sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every gust against the windows made me wonder if Brianna would dare return. I sat in Harold's armchair, the recorder still on the table beside me. I must have replayed his voice a dozen times, each word hitting deeper than the last. It wasn't just reassurance, it was direction. The addendum filed under seal. I hadn't yet seen it. At dawn, I packed my bag, grabbed my shawl, and drove back to the county probate office. The streets were empty, slick with last night's rain, and the courthouse loomed gray against the morning sky like an old sentinel guarding its secrets. Alma met me at the door, as if she had been expecting me. "You want to see the sealed file, don't you?" I nodded. She smiled, that knowing, motherly way of hers. "You always did have good timing. Judge Harmon authorized the unsealing yesterday, apparently. Your name was flagged for notification. Harold must have written it that way." She led me to a quiet back room, where a clerk brought out a slim brown envelope marked in bold red letters, "Addendum, Magnolia Trust, Confidential." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were just 2 pages and a single photograph of Harold standing in front of the house, his hand resting on the magnolia tree. On the back, he'd written in his familiar scrawl, "Every branch has roots." The first page was typed, notarized, and dated a few months before his death. It amended the original trust. In the event that Evelyn Brooks's peaceful enjoyment of the property is threatened, harassed, or undermined by any beneficiary or their spouse, the trustee shall transfer all residual assets of the estate, including financial instruments, securities, and residual shares, to Evelyn Brooks exclusively. Said individuals shall be removed from the line of succession. I blinked. Residual assets? Securities? Harold had never mentioned anything like that. We'd lived modestly, on pensions and savings, never beyond our means. The second page explained it. Proceeds from the sale of my former business holdings, totaling $740,000, are held in an investment account under Magnolia Capital Fund. Said funds are to remain undisclosed until such time that Evelyn is challenged, verbally or legally, regarding her rightful home. My throat tightened. Harold had built a hidden safety net, one that would activate only when I was attacked. He'd planned for this. I sat back in the chair, the paper trembling between my fingers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brianna had come to take the house, but in doing so, she had triggered a clause that made me wealthier than I'd ever been. When I returned home, the magnolia tree gleamed in the sunlight, petals scattered across the lawn like white confetti. I placed the photograph on the mantel beside Harold's urn. "You clever old fox," I whispered. "You saw this coming." But joy didn't last long. That evening, Alma called again. This time her voice was tense. "Evelyn, I just got an alert from the probate filing system. Someone accessed your trust records online about an hour ago." "Unauthorized." "Who?" "It came from a private law firm in Atlanta. Mercer and Payne. They represent—" She hesitated. "Your daughter-in-law." I felt my chest tighten. "She's still digging." "She's not just digging," Alma said grimly. "She's trying to file an injunction. It's not official yet, but I'd get ready." "Thank you," I said softly. "I already am." After hanging up, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table. The house felt calm, almost too calm. The papers, the tape, the letter all spread before me like pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, spelled protection. But if Brianna thought she could outmaneuver me with lawyers and forged charm, she hadn't learned what Harold and I built this life on: patience and proof. The next morning, I called Aaliyah Rowe, my old neighbor's daughter, and one of the sharpest attorneys in town. She'd grown up down the street, a bright girl who used to sell lemonade on the corner. Now she handled estate litigation with a reputation for being unshakable. "Aaliyah, it's Evelyn Brooks. I think I'm about to have a fight on my hands." Her tone shifted instantly. "Tell me everything." I explained it all: the confrontation, the tape, the trust, the addendum. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Evelyn, this addendum changes everything. If what you're reading is accurate, you're not just the lifetime beneficiary. You're the sole successor. The entire estate transfers to you outright if she challenges you in bad faith. So, the house is already yours," she said. "Legally, financially, spiritually. But we'll need to file notice before her injunction goes through. Can you come to my office in the morning?" "I'll be there," I said. When I hung up, a strange peace settled over me. For the first time, the fear that had sat in my stomach for weeks began to unravel. Harold's love was woven into every line of that document, not just for the house, but for my dignity. Still, something about the addendum gnawed at me. The language was too specific. It didn't just protect me from any beneficiary. It mentioned their spouse. Harold had known, hadn't he? He'd seen what Brianna was long before I did. That night, I walked out to the magnolia tree. The petals brushed against my skirt like cool silk. I touched the trunk, tracing the initials Harold had carved decades ago: H+E 1978. "Why didn't you tell me, love?" I whispered. "Why keep this all a secret?" The branches creaked softly above me, the air heavy with the smell of blossoms. I closed my eyes and listened to the whisper of leaves. And though I knew it was only the wind, for a moment I could almost hear Harold's voice again, low and steady. "Because you're stronger when you discover it yourself." I turned back toward the house, my heart steady. Tomorrow, I'd meet Aaliyah. We'd file the claim. We'd seal this chapter with law and proof. But as I reached the porch, I froze. A car idled at the curb, lights off, engine humming softly. I couldn't see through the tinted windows, but I didn't need to. Brianna. She sat there for several seconds, unmoving, just watching the house. Then the engine revved, and the car rolled away down the street. I stood there in the doorway until her taillights disappeared. She knew I'd found something, and she wasn't going to stop until she learned what it was. The visit from Mercer and Payne. The next morning, I arrived at Aaliyah's office with Harold's documents clutched against my chest like armor. The building sat on the edge of downtown, all glass and steel, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and ambition. But when I stepped inside, the noise of phones and chatter faded. Aaliyah had already cleared her schedule. She met me at the elevator with a firm handshake and eyes sharp as polished marble. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I read every word you sent last night. You weren't exaggerating. That addendum is a masterpiece of protection. Harold must have known the law inside out. I smiled faintly. He always did his homework. She guided me into her office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, shelves lined with case files and framed degrees. "Now," she said, pulling a folder from her desk, "Mercer and Payne filed a preliminary injunction last night. They're claiming that the trust is void because of undue influence. Basically, they're suggesting Harold was manipulated when he wrote it." "Manipulated?" I repeated, my voice dry. "By who?" "You," she said bluntly. I laughed then, short and sharp. That man argued about thermostat settings like it was a congressional debate. No one manipulated Harold Brooks. Aaliyah smiled grimly. "Exactly. But Brianna's lawyers don't need truth, just noise. They'll try to rattle you into settlement. Let me handle it." I reached into my purse and placed the recorder on her desk. "Play this." It's Harold's voice. He names the clause, the purpose, the conditions. If they want proof, here it is. She pressed play. Harold's voice filled the sleek, modern office, as warm and solid as the man himself. When the tape ended, Aaliyah leaned back in her chair. "That's it," she murmured. "Audio testament. It confirms intent. We'll submit it with the trust copy and the addendum. The court won't touch Brianna's injunction after this." Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Well, speak of the devil." "Who?" "Mercer and Payne. They're here unannounced." My stomach tightened. "Here?" "Yes. Do you want to face them or let me handle it?" I hesitated, then straightened my shoulders. If they've come to intimidate an old woman, they can look me in the eye while they try. Aaliyah grinned. "I thought you'd say that." A few minutes later, her assistant opened the door. Two people stepped in, a man and a woman, both dressed in suits so sharp they could have cut glass. The woman led, tall, blonde, confident. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "I'm Vanessa Payne, representing Mrs. Brianna Vance. This is my associate, Mr. Lott." Aaliyah's smile was ice. "Miss Payne, you're early. I didn't expect discovery to begin for another week." "Consider this a courtesy visit," Vanessa replied. Her gaze slid to me. "Mrs. Brooks, I believe we can resolve this matter quietly. My client doesn't wish to embarrass anyone. If you'll simply acknowledge the transfer of property," I cut her off. There was no transfer. She tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "Evelyn, may I call you that? My client understands that grief can cloud details." I leaned forward slightly, my tone calm but firm. "Miss Payne, I buried my husband 4 years ago. I've since balanced my own accounts, filed my repart, taxes, and renewed the mortgage insurance twice. My grief doesn't cloud details, it clarifies them." A flicker crossed her eyes, surprise, then irritation. Aaliyah opened a folder and slid it across the desk. "Before you continue, you might want to review the addendum your firm overlooked." Vanessa took it, scanning quickly. Her lips parted slightly as she read. "In the event that Evelyn Brooks's peaceful enjoyment, residual assets, immediate forfeiture." Her polished calm faltered. "Where did this come from?" "Filed under seal in 2019, Aaliyah said smoothly. "Certified by Judge Harmon. You'll find his signature at the bottom." Vanessa looked up sharply. "That wasn't in our record search." "No," I said, folding my hands, "because it wasn't meant for you." The younger associate, Mr. Lott, cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, if I may, this clause effectively transfers everything to you if the challenge continues. That means Mrs. Vance would lose not only her husband's inheritance, but any tied assets." Vanessa shot him a glare that could have frozen stone. "Thank you, Lott," she said through her teeth. Then, turning back to me, she forced a smile. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm sure we can find a compromise. Perhaps a partial settlement, some financial allowance in exchange for—" I shook my head. "No, Miss Payne, you misunderstand. Harold didn't build this house for compromise. He built it for family, and my family doesn't extort widows." Her jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." I smiled faintly. "No, I'm correcting one." Aaliyah leaned forward then, voice cool and measured. "Vanessa, I suggest you advise your client to withdraw before this escalates. You know as well as I do that a fraud claim plus an audio testament equals disbarment risk if you push forged documents. Vanessa's eyes flashed. Are you accusing? I'm warning, Aaliyah said flatly. For a moment the air between them crackled, lawyer to lawyer, predator to protector. Then Vanessa snapped the folder shut. We'll be in touch, she said curtly, rising to her feet. As they turned to leave, I said quietly, Miss Payne? She paused at the door. Tell Brianna, I said, that the magnolia still blooms, whether she's watching or not. Her expression flickered confusion, then irritation, and she left without another word. When the door closed, Aaliyah exhaled. Remind me never to underestimate you, Evelyn. I laughed softly. Oh, Harold used to say the same thing, usually right before losing an argument. Aaliyah grinned. We'll file a motion today to dismiss the injunction and secure the trust assets fully in your name. Once the court signs it, Brianna's claim will evaporate. And then it's over? She hesitated. Legally, yes, but something tells me she's not done trying. I nodded slowly. Neither am I. That evening, back home, I poured 2 cups of tea, one for myself, one for the empty chair across from me. The magnolia tree swayed outside, white petals glowing faintly under the porch light. Looks like we won another round, Harold, I whispered. But I think she's planning something. The wind brushed the windows gently, the way it always did when I talked to him. I reached for my notebook, the same one I'd kept since the funeral, and wrote a single line beneath today's date. When they underestimate you, let them. The truth works best when it's quiet. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the house settle into silence. Tomorrow, I would see the court clerk. Tomorrow, the papers would be final. But somewhere deep in my chest, I could feel it, the faint, restless hum that warned me the battle wasn't finished yet. The will that wasn't meant to be found. By 9 the next morning, I was at the courthouse, the recorder zipped inside my purse, and Harold's addendum tucked beneath my arm like a hymn book. The probate clerk, Mr. Alvarez, a small man with a careful mustache and a gentleness that reminded me of the school secretaries I used to bring muffins to, stamped Aaliyah's motion with neat, deliberate thuds. Once the judge signs, he said, sliding a pink copy back to me, the injunction is finished. Your attorney will get the order by end of day. I thanked him and turned to go, but he hesitated. Mrs. Brooks? Yes? He lowered his voice. Off the record. A courier brought something to the file about an hour ago. Not through our window, delivered upstairs to the judge's chambers. That's unusual. A small square of cold opened beneath my ribs. From whom? He glanced at the hallway, then back at me. Mercer and Payne. Of course, I murmured. Outside, the air felt 3 degrees cooler. Aaliyah texted before I reached the sidewalk. Back to office. Something new just hit the docket. Come now. By the time I arrived, the receptionist had already locked the glass door behind me. Aaliyah waited in the conference room, sleeves pushed to her elbows, a document spread open like a map no one wanted to read. On top, in block letters, Last Will and Testament of Harold M. Brooks, supersetting, dated the 14th of October 2019. 2 months after the date stamped on our addendum. I sat slowly. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft rush of the building's ventilation, like the house breathing in its sleep. Aaliyah watched my face, ready to catch whatever fell. Go on, I said. She tapped a paragraph with her pen. This new will leaves the residence to the young family most directly contributing to Harold's legacy, and then defines that as my son Peter and his wife Brianna, together with their issue. The trust is reduced to a residue. Reduced, I repeated, as if the word could be made smaller by saying it. Mrs. Brooks, she said gently, I don't believe this is real. I exhaled. Tell me why. Start with the notary. Aaliyah slid the final page toward me. A round seal pressed in blue ink sat beside Harold's scrawl. RITA Coleman, Notary Public. Commission expires the 21st of March, 2024. The expiring date stared up like an accusation. Rita Coleman died in 2018, Aaliyah said. I handled her estate. I stared at the stamp. The blue looked too bright, the pressure even like a printer pretending to be a hand. And the witnesses? I asked. Names check out as people who once worked for Harold's company, she said, flipping a page. But one moved to Oregon in 2017 and hasn't been back. The other passed away last spring. Statements from Mercer and Payne claim they signed in 2019. Impossible. I ran a fingertip over Harold's signature. It looked like his, too much like his. The H, the stubborn, overscored K. But the tail of the S didn't sag the way it did when his arthritis flared. In October 2019, he could barely button his cuffs without sighing. "There's more," Aaliyah said. "This will references the property as parcel number 4710219C, a parcel numbering system the county didn't adopt until mid-2020. So," I said, "a document dated in 2019 uses a number assigned in 2020, notarized by a woman who died in 2018, and witnessed by men who weren't in the room." Aaliyah's mouth softened into a grim smile. "Welcome to forgery, where arrogance is a feature, not a bug." I smoothed the paper anyway. Forgery or not, someone had handled it. Someone had cut it along the top with a letter opener that left a smooth lip. Someone had placed it in an envelope and paid for overnight service. I could almost see Brianna's ringed fingers guiding it into the FedEx slot, polished, certain, pleased with the find. "How did they claim to have discovered it?" I asked. "In a personal effects box recovered from a storage unit," she said, reading from the cover letter. "Unit leased under Harold's name." I blinked. Harold didn't rent storage. He hated the idea of paying rent for belongings he could give away. "So either the unit is fake," Aaliyah said, "or someone rented it in his name." I leaned back, listening to the building breathe again. Somewhere beyond the conference room glass, phones rang and chairs scraped, and a woman laughed at something on a headset. In here, the world felt narrowed to the space between a signature and a stamp. "I want to see the unit," I said. Aaliyah nodded. "I've already requested the lease and access logs. If it's legitimate, the facility keeps entry records. If they don't match Harold's timeline, that's one more nail." She slid me a magnifier. "There's something else. Look at the typeface." I bent over the page. The text looked like any other clean, black, precise. "Notice the lowercase g," she said. "Closed loop in the body, open loop in the exhibits. 2 different fonts stitched together. Sloppy cut-and-paste job." I smiled despite myself. "You catch that with your eyes?" 3 years in legal publishing," she said. "You learn where the ghosts hide." We sat for a moment, quiet. The anger that had flared when I first saw the title had cooled into something steadier. Not relief, not yet, but a sense that the ground beneath my feet still belonged to me if I kept looking where I stepped. "Vanessa will posture," Aaliyah said. "She'll call a press conference, say a new will has surfaced, but it's brittle. We'll file a motion to strike and request a forensic exam. Handwriting, ink dating, notary log, witness deposition. Paper leaves fingerprints, even when hands wear gloves." "Do we tell them we know?" I asked. She tilted her head. "What do you want?" Through the glass, the city was abound. Mosaic windows flashed, buses slid along their routes, cranes stitched the skyline. I pictured our magnolia tree in that mosaic, a square of white blooms beside a porch where Harold once sat whittling nonsense shapes, dropping ribbons of wood onto the steps. "Let them speak first," I said. "Let her get on camera. Then we answer." Aaliyah's smile warmed. Spoken like a woman who's graded 1,000 essays and knows when to let a student hang herself with her own thesis. "Harold used to say," I murmured, "a weak argument makes a strong noise." We prepared our filings for an hour, Aaliyah annotating screenshots, me arranging originals like a teacher setting up a lesson. When we finished, she squeezed my hand. "I'll call when the court sets the hearing." On the way home, I stopped for groceries, bread, tomatoes, a head of lettuce that still held the shape of the field, and when I turned onto our street, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked across from the Magnolia. A woman sat in the driver's seat, sunglasses on, hair pulled low. She made no move to leave when I parked, just watched. "Evening," I said to the air as I stepped onto the porch, the grocery bag on my hip. The woman's phone lifted briefly, a little black rectangle capturing, what? My front steps? My age? Inside, the house met me with its familiar hush. I set the groceries down, washed my hands, arranged the tomatoes cut side up with a pinch of salt. I ate standing at the counter like a sinner hiding from her own kitchen table, then made tea and carried it to the front room. The car was still there. The sunglasses turned toward my window. "You can take my picture," I said softly, "but you can't take my home." A knock interrupted the quiet, a quick, efficient rattle I recognized from only one person. I opened the door. A courier handed me a rigid envelope, "For delivery only upon receipt," he recited, the way young men recite. Things when they're paid by the hour and the hour is long. I signed, thanked him, and locked the door. In the envelope, a letter from Mercer and Payne, sugar-coated and poisonous. "Mrs. Brooks, in the interest of avoiding unpleasantness, our client proposes a simple resolution. Acknowledge the superseding will, and we will agree not to contest previous distributions or raise questions regarding potential undue influence. Please respond within 48 hours. Warmly, Vanessa Payne, Esquire." I read it twice, then folded it once. Very neat, the way I fold dish towels before setting them on the stove. I slid it into Harold's old recipe box under cornbread cast iron and left it to sit like a bitter spice in a sweet pantry. Dusk stretched its long blue fingers across the floorboards. Outside, the magnolia shifted, petals loosening one by one. I turned on a lamp and the house blinked awake, golden and stubborn. At 9, my phone hummed. "Aaliyah, got the storage facility records," she said without preamble. "Unit leased last year. Digital lease. Signature? Harold M. Brooks. Access log shows 3 entries all within the last month. Key fob registered to a B. Vance. Brianna," I said. "Or someone clumsy enough not to change initials," Aaliyah replied. "Either way, the unit's a stage prop. We'll subpoena security footage." I went very still. In the quiet, I heard Harold's fountain pen scratching over paper somewhere in my memory, the old, slow rhythm of a man who liked his letters to be handsome. "Aaliyah," I said, "I want to see the unit with my own eyes." "We will," she said, "with a court officer. We'll inventory everything, the box, the paper, the envelope it came in. If they planted it, they left footprints." From the front window, the car across the street finally eased away, taillights blinking twice before turning the corner. I let the curtain fall back into place. "Let them watch," I said. "I know who I am, in my own house." We hung up. I rinsed my teacup, set it upside down to dry, and wrote in my notebook, "A forged will is a mask. Masks slip under heat. Our job is to turn on the light." When I went to draw the curtains, something caught my eye at the edge of the porch. The brass glint of a small key tucked beneath the doormat. I picked it up, stamped on the bow. "Safe Keep Storage. Unit 317. I rolled the cold weight in my palm, feeling the faint burr where the numbers were stamped. "A calling card? A dare?" "Harold," I whispered. "They really think I spook easy." I set the key on the mantel, right beside his pewter ship. The magnolia brushed the window with a sound like a match being struck. If they wanted me to open a door, I would just not alone, and not in the dark. The key under the doormat. I stared at that brass key long after midnight. It glimmered in the lamp's soft light like an invitation or a warning. Harold used to say, "When a gift arrives without a sender, the sender's watching." That thought kept me from sleep. By morning, I had a plan. I called Aaliyah before sunrise. "I found something," I said. "A key. Stamped Safe Keep Storage, Unit 317. She was silent for a moment, then cursed softly. "They're baiting you, Evelyn. They want you to go there alone, so they can say you tampered with evidence. Then I won't go alone. You wait for me. I'll bring a court officer. Promise me that." I promised, but even as I said it, I knew I'd already made up my mind. The thing about promises at my age is they're often made to keep younger people from worrying. By 10, I was driving toward the storage facility on the edge of town, that key cold in my coat pocket. The building was a dull stretch of concrete and numbered doors, humming faintly with fluorescent lights. The clerk at the desk, a teenager with purple hair, barely looked up from his phone. "Unit 317?" I asked. He tapped the M. "Computer." "Yeah, you're on the list. Need to sign in." He handed me a clipboard. Under Authorized User, I saw it again. B. Vance. My pen hovered, then I signed E. Brooks, slow and deliberate, pressing hard enough to leave an imprint. The corridor smelled of dust and motor oil. My footsteps echoed as I reached the end where 317 waited, a green door with a heavy padlock. The key fit perfectly. Inside, the air was cold and dry. Rows of boxes, a small wooden trunk, and one thing that made my heart tighten, a photo of Harold and me, our wedding picture, framed and propped against the wall. How had it gotten here? I moved closer. The frame was dusty, but the glass was intact. Beneath it, a cardboard box labeled Personal HMB sat open, filled with papers, receipts, a cracked watch I recognized from his bedside. I felt dizzy. Either Brianna had stolen these from my home, or someone else had kept copies of Harold's life. A folder lay on top, stamped property deed amended copy. I opened it. Inside was the same forged will Mercer and Payne had flaunted, but this version carried an extra page, a memorandum, supposedly written in Harold's hand, saying I was no longer capable of managing property decisions. My stomach turned. The handwriting was almost perfect, but not quite. The loops of the Y's were tighter, the pressure too even. And then I saw it one microscopic slip, a misspelling of Brooks in the footer. Brooke. Harold had never missed that final S. I pulled my phone from my pocket and snapped photos of every page, every stamp, every smudge. A creak behind me made me freeze. "Mrs. Brooks?" a voice called. I turned. Aaliyah stood in the doorway, flanked by a uniformed court officer. Her eyes flicked from me to the open box. "You couldn't wait, could you?" I needed to see what they planted. She sighed, but there was admiration in it. "Good. Now we can prove it's staged." The officer stepped forward, gloved hands opening another box. Inside lay an envelope addressed to Vanessa Payne, Esquire, unopened. Aaliyah whistled. "They left their mail. That's bold." She slipped the envelope into an evidence bag. "Let's document everything before they spin this as trespass." As the officer photographed the scene, I noticed something glinting under the wooden trunk. I crouched and pulled out a small flash drive taped to the bottom. No label, just dust. "Let's take this too," Aaliyah said quietly. "Something tells me that's the real treasure." Back at her office, we plugged it into a secure laptop. The drive contained scanned PDFs emails between Brianna and Vanessa, months old. "B. We'll need to make the handwriting match. I'll hire a specialist. Once Evelyn's out, we can liquidate fast. M&P will handle filings. Destroy originals once scanned." Aaliyah's jaw tightened. "This is conspiracy. Plain and simple." Another file, IMG_1042.jpg, a photo of Harold's real signature, cropped from an old insurance form. They'd used it to trace his name onto new documents. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes. She stole my husband's handwriting to steal his house. Aaliyah exhaled slowly. "We're done being quiet. I'm filing a criminal complaint today." That evening, I sat by the magnolia window while she emailed the DA. The sky was bruised purple, the kind of color Harold used to call Sunday evening blue. In the garden, a wind chime stirred softly. The fight was finally moving from whispers to record books. Then my phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "Enjoyed the field trip? You shouldn't touch what isn't yours. B." I stared at the screen, a strange calm washing over me. I typed back one sentence. "Everything I touched belongs to me, and so does justice." When I hit send, I looked out at the magnolia tree. Its blossoms were closing for the night, white petals folding like hands in prayer. I whispered into the dark, "Let her come. This time I'm not the one who should be afraid." The court of truth. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the way libraries do when the air itself remembers secrets. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Aaliyah, hands folded tight in my lap. Across from us, Brianna whispered frantically to Vanessa Payne, her red nails tapping against the table like a metronome of nerves. Judge Harmon entered, robe flowing, eyes sharp behind his glasses. The bailiff called the room to order. Aaliyah rose first. "Your Honor, before you is Exhibit A, an electronic correspondence between Mrs. Brianna Vance and her counsel, detailing the creation of a forged testamentary document. Exhibit B is a forensic analysis confirming the notary's seal was copied from an unrelated deed, dated before her death. The judge's brow furrowed. And you're asserting this alternate will is entirely fraudulent? Aaliyah nodded. We are, Your Honor, and the State Forensic Lab's ink analysis supports it. Vanessa stood, her tone crisp. Your Honor, those emails are taken out of context. My client was merely, enough, the judge said, cutting her short. We will examine the evidence. He motioned to the screen as Aaliyah played the audio from the flash drive. Harold's recorded voice filled the room, calm, measured, unmistakably his. If Evelyn ever faces deceit, this clause ensures her safety. This home belongs to her until her last day. The silence that followed was thunderous. I looked at Brianna. The color had drained from her face, just as it had the day I first said, "Let's read the will." She sank into her chair, lips trembling. Aaliyah stepped forward. Your Honor, this recording predates both wills. It confirms Harold Brooks's clear intent. The later document, she gestured toward Brianna's table, was a deliberate attempt to defraud this court. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze fixed on Brianna. Mrs. Vance, do you deny authorizing the use of a deceased notary's seal? Brianna's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Vanessa reached for her arm. She jerked away. I didn't know, she whispered. It was Vanessa's idea, she said we could win. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Vanessa's expression hardened. Your Honor, my client is clearly Miss Payne, the judge said coldly. You may want to consider counsel of your own. Court will forward this to the district attorney. He turned to me then. Mrs. Brooks, by law and by conscience, the property and all associated assets remain yours. The addendum stands as the final valid expression of Harold Brooks's will. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once, sharp as a heartbeat. Aaliyah squeezed my hand. Around us, the murmurs rose like surf, but I barely heard them. All I could see was the magnolia tree in my mind, white petals opening in sunlight. As Brianna was led away by officers for questioning, she turned to look at me. There was no anger now, only the stunned awareness of someone who'd finally met the truth and realized it didn't blink. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea cooling beside me. The magnolia rustled gently, the way Harold used to clear his throat before saying something wise. The house stood silent, strong mine again, though it had always been. I didn't feel triumphant, only steady, like a tree after a long storm. I opened my notebook and wrote the final line, Justice isn't loud. It's the sound of a door closing behind those who thought you were weak. Then I closed the book, exhaled, and let the evening wind carry Harold's peace back home. If this story moved you, if you felt every twist and every truth, make sure to ***, subscribe to Time's Twisted Ties. For more stories that grip your heart and leave you breathless till the very last line.